Hello, and you are listening to Talk to Seattle. I'm your host, Jason Rigden, and on this episode, I have Tom from the Seattle Bike Blog. He's been putting out independent bicycling news and opinion since 2010. This is a really fantastic conversation. I really thank Tom for coming on. But first, I've got this quick message. If you like this show and you want to support it, would you please do me a favor? Go tell a friend. You see, word of mouth is still the number one way people learn about new podcasts. So do me a favor, the show a favor, and your friend a favor, and tell them to go to talktoseattle.com and take a listen to the show. This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode's show, I'm here with Tom Fucoloro of the Seattle Bike Blog. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. So could you tell me give a little bit of introduction to the Seattle Bike Blog?
Yeah, so seattlebikeblog.com is a completely independent news source about biking and transportation and road safety and politics in Seattle. And I do it full time. And I've been writing the blog since 2010, but it really went full time in 2012. And, it's pretty much something of a dream job for me to just kind of focus on kind of what seems like a pretty niche topic, but actually has an enormous amount of stories to tell about it. So that's what I do all day. Is I just report and write stories about biking. It's pretty cool.
And how do you find all of your stories? I'm always amazed at the volume of content you're able to create.
Yeah, well, what's incredible is that it seems like the more I write, the more stories come up, and they just kind of come from the ether. And it's kind of funny because you'd think at some point you'd write them all, but actually the more active I am on the blog, the longer my list of stories to write gets. And the list is so long, I'll never get to the bottom of it. I think it's just a funny thing about when people are talking and thinking about an idea, they tend to go out and do something about it because it's on their mind, and that generates things to write about. And people come up with ideas, people start groups, people start campaigns to fix this street or whatever, and then they tell me about it, and then I have something to write about and something to cover and then something to follow up on later. And all of that just kind of multiplies until I feel like I'm constantly, on the verge of drowning because I feel like I'm barely keeping up with all the news, which is incredible because it seems like a pretty niche topic, but there's a lot to cover.
And you said this is actually your full-time job. So do you finance it with ads, or is it more of like the Patreon kind of model?
Yeah. So it's a mix. So I have advertisers that I don't do Google ads or any of the big normal ad like syndicated ads like that, because being both a niche in topic and a niche in geography, there's kind of a limit to the raw numbers of clicks that I would get on this blog. So instead, I sell ads directly to local businesses at kind of a flat monthly rate. And that, I think, works out a lot better because, it sort of frees me from chasing clicks, because these businesses don't care if I'm getting, if I got something viral on Reddit and people in, New York and Australia and all over the place are clicking, because that's not who they're trying to reach. What they want to reach is they just want people who are engaged, active members of the community, interested in local transportation politics, right? And so they want to reach those people. And so it's almost more like I liken it more to, a business like sponsoring to have like a banner at an event or something. It's more like that than it is like an internet ad, because internet ads are cheap, targeted things where you're just kind of trying to, see someone who like happened to search for something vaguely related to what you do, and then this is much more direct. Like you're supporting and sponsoring this news source that people value. And so that's kind of how I make those relationships with local businesses. And because they're local and doing something that I like, and I'm doing something they like, it's a really neat kind of mutual relationship. I don't know, I'm really proud of how that's kind of worked out. I think the people who advertise on the site, it's not only are they supporting me financially, but I want them to succeed because I believe in them because they're cool. So it's pretty neat. And then so it's partially funded through advertising that way, and then it's partially funded through reader supporters. I used to call them subscribers, but then people were confused because they thought that makes it sound like you're going to get extra content. You don't get anything extra for supporting. You just get to know that you supported it. So I started calling them supporters. But I created that program before Patreon existed. So as soon as Patreon existed, I was like, that would have been so much easier than what I did. but it's all right.
Well, one thing you're doing with it is, like you said, they're not necessarily getting extra content, which sometimes is a little bit frustrating with the Patreon folks, is because they have, it's almost like having a paywall.
Yeah. I don't, there's kind of two reasons why I don't want to do that. One is that I like the idea of free information, but also I am my own tech support because, this is a one-person shop, and it is a miracle that the blog loads at all because I don't know what I'm doing. I definitely would have no idea how to create a paywall. Like so that's the other reason why it didn't happen. But yeah, I'm not interested in doing that. I mean, I want this blog to, have an impact, and that means I want as many people to read it as possible. And so, yeah, I don't need to put up barriers to that.
Yeah, well, I thank you for that. That's great. So how do you stay motivated because you're basically covering the same topic every day?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely go through waves of burnout, especially when I'm writing about something and it feels like I've written the same story like 8 times. It just, is a different street this time, but it's the same thing. Sometimes that can get hard, but once you start reporting on it, once you start talking to some people who live nearby, everyone's kind of got, their own reasons and their own interesting, kind of life stories of like why, if this street was safer, that would be positive for them. And then it starts to get interesting again. So it's sort of, it's monotonous, sometimes from like the macro level. But then once you start talking to people, I mean, every single person is interesting if you talk to them long enough. And, every single street is different if you talk to enough people there. So that's sort of what helps, but also that it's sort of mission driven by this idea that our streets should be safer, that people shouldn't be killed or seriously injured, just because they're trying to, get around. Like that, it doesn't have to be this way. That collisions are preventable, but that we choose not to prevent them because oh, well, the street was that way yesterday, so I guess it's fine today. Even though, well, yesterday it injured someone and today it injured someone. Like it's not okay. But we sort of, I think that as a society, we've accepted a certain amount of death and injury on our roads is just like acceptable. It's like, it feels almost like, oh, well, you just won the negative lottery, right? Like, it's not going to happen to me. It's like, but that's just such a horrendous way to think about transportation, because A, there are places in the world where that doesn't happen. And B, like you go into, it's not a rare thing. We think that's like some sort of act of God or whatever when there's a terrible collision and someone gets killed, and it's, oh, what terrible luck, blah, blah, blah. But you go into any room full of people and you say, raise your hand if you or someone you love has been seriously injured or killed in a traffic collision. Every single hand just about is going to go up. So like the reach of this problem is immense, and yet we don't talk or think about it that way. And people, I think, don't like to think about that it could be different. And so for me, I think it's such an achievable goal. And really what it just requires is people to kind of change their mindset about transportation and, why we might be doing a safety project. And so that's kind of enough for me to keep going because, that's just such a potent goal for me in life is to reach that. And so it's sort of, keep your eye on the reason why we do this, and then makes it easier to do it every day because it's, I feel like times are changing. Like more and more people are starting to question, like, maybe this didn't need to happen, and maybe I need to do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think that the momentum is building. It's just car culture in America is an immense thing to change, and it's going to change person by person, and that's a lot of people. So, but we're, it's happening. It's I think, yeah, it's going. It's going to be hard.
So why are you so passionate about bicycling in particular?
So it started with, I graduated from college in 2008 with the intention of being a journalist, which it sounds like a setup to a joke or something, because that's like the worst year you could possibly have tried to become a journalist. Like all the journalism jobs, like I had an internship at the Kansas City Star the summer of 2008. It was a pretty cool internship. I was really excited about it, and I felt very lucky to get it. And I walked in on the first day, and everyone in the newsroom was crying because they just had their first ever round of layoffs. And I was like, okay, this is not going to turn into a job, is it? And it did not turn into a job, that's for sure. And so I lived in Denver for a year, and then I sold my car in Denver because I had started biking, mostly to save money and because it was fun. And so my car was just collecting parking tickets. So I sold it, and we used that, my now wife and I used that money for my car to move to Seattle because we had some friends here and it seemed like a cool place. So I showed up with just a bicycle to get around, and I was biking around to odd jobs and temp jobs. And, I kept hearing about, Seattle being this, great bike friendly place, but it sure seemed like a lot, these bike lanes were pretty awful because they would just kind of randomly end all over the place. Like you never actually go anywhere and like depend on a bike lane to be there. And so I found it a little bit stressful to bike. And so I started looking for, stories, is anyone covering biking? Like what, why are the bike lanes, are we making them better? Like what's happening? And so I was just kind of looking around, and no one was really doing it full time. And I thought, well, hey, I could do that. So I just started a blog, and I called it Seattle Bike Blog, and started writing. And I didn't really know anything what I was talking about. I was just a person who was biking. But being a journalist, you don't have to be an expert in a subject so long as you're willing to put in the time to find someone who is and ask them. And so that's what I did. I just, tracked down people who knew what was happening, made some contacts at the city and just started asking them questions. And that's how it started. And it's just kind of grown from there. Now I'm something of an expert, I guess, because I've written so many stories about it, but it didn't start that way. But kind of through the process of it, I think biking for me, it started just about biking, but it kind of quickly turned into being about more than that. In the summer of 2011, there was a series of 3 deaths, people biking kind of in really close to each other in time. Robert Townsend in the U District, and Brian Fairbrother, kind of in Eastlake, Fairview area, and Mike Wang on Dexter. And this kind of scared the hell out of everyone because, felt like a trend or something, and it ended up, if you look at it statistically, it was just a weird blip. We'd had a long time without deaths, and we'd had a long time after it without deaths. So it was just kind of weird that they happened really close to each other. But the fact that happened really kind of shook a lot of people up. And, so through the course of that, I met a lot of people um, who either knew those three people or had kind of similar, had been close to deaths and serious injuries before. And I started to really learn a lot about, the cost of traffic collisions, the emotional cost to, whole communities can be devastated by the loss of one person, right? And yet 40,000 people die in traffic every year in the United States alone. And that, you got to think about like, well, that's 40,000 people. But then you think about how many people are impacted by that death. And, it's hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people are impacted by traffic deaths every year. And when someone is seriously injured, sometimes that's a livelihood that's gone. Someone can't do whatever their career was, can't do it anymore. Or has, family members have to, move in with them or, bring them into their homes and take care of them. Or otherwise, families' lives, whole structures change. I mean, it's like serious injury is like a huge deal. I think that we sort of, it's like, oh, well, it's not a death. It's like, well, that's hugely impactful to whole communities every time it happens. And hundreds of thousands of people are seriously injured every year in US streets. And it just seemed sort of so overwhelming that, there's these three people that died in Seattle, but the impact of those three deaths was enormous. And so I started really like writing about the impact of traffic death and injury kind of from that perspective. And the city leadership sort of started really at the same time was sort of thinking about traffic deaths in that way. And so that's when the city developed their first Vision Zero plan, which they called the Road Safety Action Plan. I don't know if that was 2012, I guess, which really set the groundwork for what has become Vision Zero and what became the Bicycle Master Plan and kind of these road traffic, the Pedestrian Master Plan update, the kind of all these different ways the city was thinking about transportation. But it's kind of like changed by that summer, and I think that also changed the way that I write about and I think about this issue. And so I guess it's still called Seattle Bike Blog, and I still have a focus on biking, but it's not just about biking to me. I mean, it's about every kind of way that people get around. It's almost like it's more about like the form of the city. What do we prioritize on our streets? And so you start to think a lot about, well, what are ways that we are forcing people to drive cars when they don't really want to? Like when you're forcing people to live far away because you're not building enough housing close to things within biking and walking distance of things, or within biking and walking distance of transit centers, or you are allowing a building to be built, but you're forcing a ton of car parking to be in it, which means that everyone has to pay more in rent because they have to pay for this car parking, whether they have a car or not. And that makes it more expensive. And car ownership is directly correlated with income. The more money you make, the more likely you are to own a car. And so if the housing's all expensive, then there's probably more likely to own a car because it's just how statistics work. And it's kind of like we're doing things backwards. Like we're making the housing that's close to things unaffordable to people who could most benefit from not needing to own a car. And then you're forcing lower income people to live in places where they have to have a car that they can't afford and they have more dangerous roads. And so they're trying to walk and bike and reach transit on roads that were never created for that, with that in mind. And it's just really like an idea, concept that kind of balloons out of control, but that all of these things are things that we can change. Like a lot of them could change just by changing a couple of rules in a rule book at City Hall. And, we'd start building different buildings and that cost less for people and things like that. So, it's like, I was like, yeah, I mean, it seems like a huge problem, but totally within our control to change. We just have to want to do it. And so I think that kind of become more what I'm writing about in a lot of ways is that And it's just kind of funny that it all kind of came from the question of like, why is it like not better to bike here? and somehow you end up there, and like, analyzing the, racist history of single family zoning policy and stuff like that, but it's kind of, it all makes sense. It's all connected. It's all interconnected.
So do you see Seattle as a bike-friendly city? I mean, there's a weird hostility towards bicycling, I feel, quite often. Yeah.
I think Seattle is a great place to ride a bike. And I think biking is a great way to get around Seattle. They're sort of two related, but slightly different answers. And I think that for the most part, people are very understanding of people biking. Like, I mean, I'm from Missouri, and biking is an extremely weird way to get around, especially outside, a set number of neighborhoods down, in the center city of St. Louis, where there's a dense collection of homes and businesses, right? In those places, people do bike. But, I was from the suburbs of St. Louis, and I mean, almost nobody I was ever biking, or if they were doing it for exercise. They weren't doing it to actually get anywhere. So you come to Seattle, and it is totally normal for someone to ride a bike to get around here. And so I think that people also approach it from like, if you see someone biking on the street, that you're not surprised to see them, because there's enough people doing it that it's not that weird. Of course there are jerks, and that sucks. And, and it especially sucks when there's not a bike lane so that you can feel safe from them. When you have to be out trying to mix with traffic and someone decides to be aggressive towards you. It happens. It's rare, but those moments stick with you. But, I think that overall, like, one thing that people complain about a lot, which I think is kind of funny, is that people driving in Seattle are too nice to people who bike. Like, you'll approach an intersection and someone driving will stop for you, even if you have a stop sign and they don't. And it's, people get annoyed by that. People who bike get annoyed by this. Just go. Like, when it's your turn, you just go. But I don't know. I find it endearing. I think it's cute. It's like, so I always wave and smile, even though I would rather have they just went and took their turn, because, that's how roads are supposed to work. But they're they're trying to be nice. And so I want to like encourage that, and I think that, Seattle has, this is kind of, I think this says more about the rest of the country than maybe it says about Seattle, but Seattle has some of the safest streets in the whole country. And it has some of the safest drivers in the whole country because of that. And, part of it's perhaps the kind of like overly cautious driving culture here, but it's also partly just because our streets it's very difficult to speed on many of our streets because they're either super skinny with parking on both sides so that two cars can't even pass each other, or there's so much traffic you're not going anywhere. And so as a result, we have like surprisingly few, like far lower rate of deaths and serious injuries on our streets than almost, I think, any other big city except for, I think, Boston is safer in that way, which is, again, Boston is known as a city where people are terrible at driving, but it's actually like the safest big city. And it's because it's kind of chaos, but it's slow because you can't go fast, and speed is what kills people. Like, Seattle has a ton of like fender benders and side swipes, people, swipe and park cars. So sometimes every year you'll see there's like an insurance company, auto insurance company says like Seattle's has the worst drivers in the country, or the fifth worst drivers, or something like that. I don't know if you ever remember those surveys come out. All the news stations run with that, and everyone thinks it's really funny. And that's because what they're calculating is the most number of claims filed per capita. And Seattle's very high on that, but it's like fender benders and side swipes. It's not people getting killed and injured. And so I feel like it always misses the point of like, no, roads are messy. Public spaces are very messy places. And so long as everyone's going slow enough, and is paying attention because you have to, because you can't just sit back and go on cruise control and expect everything to go fine. Everyone gets where they're going, and people are going to do it safer if you're just going slow and cautious. And I think Seattle's a city that's sort of, the streets force you to do that. It's hard to. There aren't many situations in Seattle where you can turn on the cruise control and take your foot off the gas. Like, you're pretty much riding the brake the whole time, and I think it's makes it a somewhat unpleasant experience to drive, which is why I don't do it. Even, but also it makes it safer for everyone, so it's worth it. It's worth it. I don't know if that. I forget what your original question was.
Oh no, it's quite all right. Yeah, yeah. So, what have been some of the biggest challenges of running the Seattle Bike Blog?
Money. Being. I'm terrible at business. I'm just horrendous at it. I'm a journalist. I don't particularly enjoy the part where I'm tracking down invoices and trying to go out and make new sales and things like that. I don't enjoy that work particularly well, and so I, as a result, I don't do it as much as I should. And so, it's hard. It's really, my goal when I started out was I wanted this to be able to pay my bills, and it can do that. But I have a kid now who was born in January, and that is sort of kids are expensive, it turns out. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge. Being an independent journalist is not a particularly lucrative profession. For the first couple of years, there were a couple of years where I dramatically underestimated self-employment tax. So come tax season, in one year, in like 2013 or something like that, I had $8 to my name after tax season, and that felt amazing. I'm like, oh my god, I made it. So I probably walked across. I was living in Fremont, so yeah, I guess it was probably 2011 then. I walked across the street and got a paseo sandwich with my $8 to celebrate. But yeah, so it's hard to do this kind of work. You don't do it for the money. Let's put it that way. And so to this point, I've been fine, and we're still fine, figuring it out. But I'm imagining at some point I'm gonna have to figure out how to squeeze some more money out of it, because but this, I sort of see it as sort of part of my mission too, because I believe strongly in independent journalism, because our news institutions are falling apart. And so I think that we can't sit here and rely on them, especially for local and regional coverage, because they're kind of collapsing, and we need them. So I see independent journalism as a way to kind of support work that needs to happen, in lieu of, kind of the failings of the news media at large. Especially thinking about the major news companies that are closing all their regional and local papers. Like the closure of the PI was a good example. Like it was closed because it wasn't their flagship paper, and so they didn't care about it. And to invest to kind of keep that kind of thing going, and just kind of closed shop and threw everyone to the wolves, and now we have less news coverage. And we're losing Como to Sinclair owns that, and it's getting, who knows what they're going to do with that, but the things that they've already done are extremely ethically questionable. So I think that we need independent news because of that. I think that The Stranger prints every other week now, right? And I think their newsroom shrunk a little bit, and City Art's just closed. I mean, it's tough out there, that's for sure. And so part of me kind of wants to persist through this and find ways to make it work, so that it's something that I could open source, and so other people could do it. And find ways for independent journalists to kind of help each other out and share resources and stuff like that. So that's sort of like a passion of mine that has been put on pause since the baby was born, but it's something I want to get back into because it is hard, but we need it. So yeah, figuring that out is going to be, I don't know, it almost feels like the challenge of my generation of journalists, because we can't just keep, most people who don't, if you don't have your own blog or something that you're making money on, then you're freelancing, and the freelancers are just wildly abused in this industry. It's disgusting the way that places that take freelance work treat their writers, and
the industry is just disgusting at times. Yeah,
it's horrible. Yeah, and it's like you're just punished for wanting to tell real life stories to people in real time, which is a thing that people want to read, but somehow the people who do it don't get money for it. They're sort of like artists in that way, right? Like our society simultaneously values art above like anything else in every way except for money, in which case we don't want to pay for it unless it's, the most famous people. It's like, oh, I guess that's a failure of capitalism. That's what I'm getting at. It's like let's see this. So music is really important to you, society, but you don't want to pay any artists other than the most famous ones. Okay.
Yeah. See how that
doesn't
works
make
out.
Much sense. And it's the same with news. Like, it's so important to people that things are covered and that the press is free, and yet somehow our society has found no way for any of that money to get to the people who learn things and write them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and good things and not clickbait articles or superficial articles or articles that are kissing the butt of some bigwig.
And not PR. It says like so many journalistic outlets essentially rerun press releases as though it's journalism, and it's giving so much power to companies that can afford to pay PR people to provide content to journalistic outlets that are desperate for content and don't want to pay for it. So, it's a perfect match in every way except for being good for society. That's terrible for that. So yeah, I mean, it's and that's its whole other issue though. That's so hard, and I don't know a clear path forward for that, but I think we got to keep trying new things until something sticks.
So do you have any plans for the future going forward?
Right, I'm still sort of in survival mode with the kid. Babies are exhausting, and so the blog has been a little. It's been, I shouldn't say a little. It's been a lot slower. The past, well, I mean, past 10 months than it was before. And so my goal is to get it back up to speed and kind of focus on getting the more stories out, more reporting done per story, which is sort of just get it back to the way it was before the baby was born. And then I'm gonna have to try to bolster the business model and try to make it more financially stable. And then but at the same time, I'm also thinking about writing a book. I had someone approach me kind of asking for a proposal, so I'm going to put together a book proposal, and I have no idea where that's going to go, but that's a pretty exciting idea to me. Be able to spend long form time on something rather than the writing something and hitting publish and then having it immediately out there, and then that's it, and then I got to do it again tomorrow. The idea of working longer on something is actually pretty appealing to me. And yeah, just I'll probably have a lot more content about how to bike with a baby and bike with a kid, because as she grows up, I'm gonna have to learn all about that myself. Like, how do you be a car-free parent in Seattle? Like, a lot of people think that it's impossible, but it is not. There's a community of people who do it, and they're very good at sharing that information and helping each other out. And so I'm looking forward to kind of covering that more. That's a really fun. So far, every bit of biking with Fiona has been just pure joy. It's so rewarding, and it makes me think about biking in an entirely different way than I ever did before. So I'm pretty excited to kind of work more of that in. So far, I've been a little quiet about it all so far, just because I'm just sort of in survival mode. But I'm excited to get more organized about that and how I write about it.
And so how can people help support the Seattle Bike Blog?
You can definitely go to Seattle Bike Blog, and on the black navigation bar, you can click support. And you can sign up to be a supporter. It's pay what you can. I've got a $5, $10, and $20 a month plans, and you don't get anything extra for paying more. It's just, whatever's comfortable to you. Sort of acknowledging different people have different levels of support that they can do, and I want them to all feel equally valued. Because I very much appreciate it. And it goes directly into keeping this thing going. Every penny of it. And then send me tips, tom@seattlebikeblog.com. Or you go to seattlebikeblog.com. My email is just on the sidebar. I'm always looking for new information or, whatever. If you go out and you're inspired to start something new, tell me about it, because that's my favorite stuff to write about is, hey, someone had an interesting idea and then did it. I love those stories because it's cool. And, one of the cool things about biking is that you don't have to wait around for your idea to come to fruition a lot of times, because you can just go out and do it immediately. It's like, it's so much more, versatile in that way. Like, if transit advocates are amazing, but the things that they, work to advocate in favor of, you'll get to step on that train in 15 years. But with biking, if you're organized enough, there's nothing stopping the city from going out tomorrow and painting a bike lane. Like, it's costs nothing. It's entirely just political. It's cost isn't the problem. It's political. Politics are the problem, and that you can change just by getting organized. So it's pretty cool how that you can get kind of an immediate effect out of biking, and then that can immediately kind of change the way that your neighborhood works, which is such a cool thing to be able to do. But also the same with, like, if you do an event and you inspire people to get together and ride bikes together, you can pull together a bike event on very short notice, very little lead time, so long as you're willing to put in the work and spread the word about it. If it's a good idea, people will show up, and then you've gotten a successful event. and you can hold them for very little money to put in, and then you can you might accidentally start a community, which is really cool. So it's just a really neat thing, and I love covering stuff like that. So yeah, do interesting things and then tell me about them, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tom, for coming on the show. That was a really great conversation. If you want to know more about the Seattle Bike Blog, just go to seattlebikeblog.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Talk to Seattle is hosted and produced by me, Jason Rigden. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please email jason@talktoseattle.com. Our theme music was Lobby Time by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0.